Just want to kind of comment real quickly though, and Brian's with us today too, so maybe give him a microphone in case he has anything to add to this. But I just had mentioned I was at the district convention this past week, and really thought that that was a pretty cool convention as far as like I said, it was interesting for a second because there seemed to be some concern about us commending ourselves how we handled the pandemic. And I jokingly was joking with other fellow pastors about having to revisit the whole COVID trauma thing that took place, with all the, with congregations and the decisions that we had to make, and going from 2 weeks to bend the curve to maniac and madness all over the place. So so it was definitely a challenge in that regard. So there were some that were kind of like, well, can we honestly say that every pastor handled it as well as they could have? And I think my answer still has to be yes. Did we all make mistakes? Not surprising, since pastors are poor, miserable sinners too, and leaders are poor, miserable sinners too. But for the most part, we made it. We're here. So, like I said, it was kind of it kind of got me sharing with my friend Pastor Leyenbauer from Christ the King down at the Lake of the Ozarks. Some of you guys know him, right? Yeah. So it was like we were sharing Monty Python jokes during that time. So, but again, I mean. That side, away from it, like I said, I think for the most part, to at least me, I think it drew me closer to brothers and sisters, or brothers especially in the circuit, and there was just really a great fraternity, I thought, at this conference, and Dr. Hagin, President Hagin, is really focused strongly on health of pastors and health of congregations and those types of things. And really trying to get those things focused back in. And so, I mean, I just applaud him for, that particular effort, on things that are going on. And, the district events, the couple things that they're really trying to emphasize is one, church worker recruitment, because that's in really tough shape, especially on the teaching side. It's scary how bad that is. It's possible that the number of teachers that are exiting the public schools that maybe find their way into our Lutheran schools might save the day in that regard. That's potential, but when we just don't have pastors in schools, I mean, some of the church worker things, at some of our colleges is just like next to nothing. It's just a small percentage that's there. But they're doing things to try to help bring that around too, making it easier for them to go to college and costs. I'm afraid that will recover at some point by doing those types of things, but we might have missed the boat a little bit, on that. But and what I mean by that is we have, church workers are spending a lot of money to get an education that they can be a teacher or a pastor in our synodical body, and then they're not obviously making the same kind of money that they could even make in the public world teaching, let alone whatever profession that's there. So again, it's good to see that we're not just like, oh yeah, we need people, but we're also trying to do things to make it more possible, in that regard too. So it was good to see those types of things going on. They had, let's see, what was their other emphasis? I mean, it was the family was a big focus too, but there was one other one that was, do you remember what that was?
The whole focus of the whole thing was for the future generations.
So it was to tell the next generation was the theme of the whole thing, and that's that psalm that I used in there today. So this is kind of interesting information because our guys, this is research that's done by us in this regard, and so there's a lot of parallel types of research that's going along with some of the figures and statistics that I shared today in worship. And I think for our board of directors and elders, I also shared, the 6 points of was just kind of condensed it down from Dr. Kiesling's, he's the one that's putting on the National Youth Gathering. Talk about a guy that looked tired. I mean, you got 21,000 youth going to Houston, and you're the guy that's at the head of that ship, right? So, but anyway, I mean, he did a great, phenomenal presentation on bringing up those points, these categories. They've been working on this data for a while now, and then now they've been able to unload this. This is research that's coming back from the early 90s, and like they said, this isn't like really surprising data. I think we all sort of suspected that this is what you would see with this stuff anyway. But it's just kind of nice to have it more concrete, more, these are statistical things that we're telling them. Last time we had a National Youth Gathering, I know they were surveying a lot of the kids at those. They swung by, they took their surveys, and they did those types of things. So they're just getting different perspectives on that information. So good stuff, and again, that primary focus on, telling the next generation, but then, the Missouri District is partnering with one of the pioneers in this area, Ben Freudenberg, and his Family Friendly Partners Network, which was based out of Concordia, Ann Arbor. He had been doing these things a long time. Deaconess Kim, myself, and Kathleen and Corinne, our Board of Youth leader, we went down to St. Matthew this week just to see what they were doing, because Pastor Andrews is actually going to be one of the coaches for the district. All this stuff is kind of coming up, so we wanted to see what they were doing in their program. I think they got a little excited about it. I hope they got a little excited about this, because this is what, I was, wanting to introduce with our, growing faithful families thing already. So we're possibly adding, these stepping stones, or what do you call those, badges of honor, or there are different ways that they call these types of things, but they're, steps. This is a step, and then the next step, and then the next step you do something different. Those types of things. Drawing a blank on the name of what he called them, but anyway, there's been a pretty good, strong influence from, a couple guys that I know, that professors at the seminary, that were introducing their ideas of what they were kind of doing. I know one had implemented a Sunday school confirmation program almost along the lines of an Eagle Scout type of project, where you have these badges and these types of things coming. So it's I think it's just easy to copy what somebody else is doing and then make it, meld it to what you have. So this will be something cool to add onto there, but it really brings those families of the same kids, those groups together in meetings and in understanding of what to do in these blocks. And hopefully this will be encouraging to our families, in the future generations to come here. So again, if I could go back as a vicar, 16 years ago, I bought wholeheartedly into what Ben Freudenberg was talking about, that we got to get our families in the Word, but never really put any rubber to the road on it. If I could go back in time and do something different, that's one thing that I certainly would have. I don't know if it would have been received well, maybe kind of like how it got received here at first too. I don't know. But again, this is a positive thing. This is putting things back the way God intended them. And this is why we're studying the catechism, right? Because it says, as the head of the household should teach. And the church has made a mistake by putting forward that we're the primary faith formers of your kids. Our society is used to outsourcing things. This is a terminology that Pastor Andrews used. Our families are so used to outsourcing stuff, whether it's someone that comes in and cleans your house, somebody that comes and plans your vacation. We're going up to a VRBO. They got a place already set up, so you don't even have to worry about that. You just bring all your junk and you hang out there for a week, right? And then you leave. Everything gets outsourced. And so families have gotten so into the habit of this outsourcing this kind of stuff, and God never intended for faith formation to be outsourced. This is God's design to be centered in the family, okay? So, it's one of the things that I'm like I said, I've been here long enough that I think it's a pretty big hill to die on for me. But I think this is a hill worth dying for, not that it will change something like in the immediate year or so. But again, it's kind of like our generation's fund that we put together. This is so that 80 years from now, somebody looks back and say, wow, those people at St. Stephen were really smart by putting away some money so that we could be drawing interest and doing ministry in whatever climate or whatever it might be, right? That's what you do there. So hopefully they'll look back and say, wow, they were bold in going forward of, instead of being the person that thinks that they're the primary faith former, to say, no, we are partners in this process, right? We are partners in this process. And it's in our baptismal liturgy, right? What do we promise every time a child is baptized in our sanctuary or privately? The church promises, right? To take care of that child, to make sure that that child is kept in the faith. This is not on me. This is not on Deaconess Kim. This is not on the leaders of the church. This is on all of us. That's why it's called Team Jesus, right? Because we are the body of the Christ. And even the little pinkies are more important, are just as important, right? Agreed? I get an amen. Sometimes I wish you guys, there we go, we're a little Baptist-y, so. All right. So anyway, like I said, I was very encouraged by that. I shared that information today just to be encouragement, especially to our dads. Because, because we're so used to outsourcing things, we don't always, we can feel ill-equipped to be able to do stuff like this. And so that's, God thinks you're good enough to be a dad because he made you a dad. So, feel empowered to be a dad or a grandpa or whatever it is that you're empowered to do. And know and trust that God wouldn't have put you in that responsibility if he didn't think you could handle it. So, here we go. Never too late to start. That's why we're starting here. Never too late to start. So, okay. Any questions or anything about the convention or anything like that you had? President Harrison spoke too, but yeah.
Well, if anybody's interested, I think the workbook is sitting on Sydney's desk. Interested in what all went on down there and the wording of all the resolutions. Dr. Kiesling, the essayist, I think he had about an hour and a half message split into two parts. Mm-hmm. Elected officers for the next 3 years. And it was, if nothing else, an enlightening experience. Some of the resolutions, they were kind of nitpicky on wording. They thought that we should repent before we pat ourselves on the back.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was an experience. So if anybody's got any questions or want any more information, just ask.
Yeah, in some of these presentations, I didn't get a chance to go through them. I won't be able to do that till probably a little later. And then maybe we'll have some even more fun things that would come out of the National Youth Gathering to kind of splice and dice too. But I was going to have Sydney put together some of the speaking specifically to what I was kind of talking about. And we'll put that on our YouTube channel so we can kind of guide people in the direction of listening to that if you're wanting to understand a little bit more of the basis and foundation for why this is important, why it needs to be done this kind of way. And like I said, it's not like it's all just brand new stuff. This has been out there. These talks have been out there for, years and years and years. And so, like I said, I think in order to be intentional about that, we have to have a congregational commitment to saying, yes, this is who we are. This is who we are. That we're concerned about the next generation. And I think that's the more buy-in we have into that this is the most important thing. Otherwise it won't change. I can have a dream. I've been here long enough to know at St. Stephen that if you want to jump out and run and lead, you better be careful because you might look back and see you're the only guy out there. So, there's nothing wrong with that too sometimes, right? Because if somebody's running off in the wrong direction, you don't all want to be following them either, right? So I'm hoping that I've earned enough trust in that regard to say, hey, if I think this is important, then we think this is important. You know, that's my hope. But, you know, this, it's not just me. This is why I love that we got a district behind us on this too. They're putting a lot of money into this, and the coaching would probably they're still trying to hammer out what they're going to charge for the coaching of it. My gut tells me that somebody donated a big pile of money to go towards this, and then they're just trying to figure out what's the best way to kind of do this. So, yeah, so it's kind of interesting because we are in that kind of weird time where we have a lot of money that's out there. For example, like our golf tournament will get matched dollar for dollar. Every dollar that we raise to go to Liberty Women's Clinic is going to be matched because Synod has $1 million sitting in a pot that will match anybody's donations that they're giving to support Women's Clinic. It doesn't have to be Lutherans for Life. It can be Liberty Women's Clinic or Rachel House or whatever you're doing. All these donations done on the congregational levels will be matched. And President Harrison said when that $1 million is gone, they're going to put another $1 million in it. So, you know what I mean? So there's money that's there for these causes. And so, you know, my hunch is that we're somewhere in that ballpark of gathering that, and I think that's a cool thing. All right, anybody else, questions or anything? Yeah, Barry.
Was there any discussion about how our church in society, because of our beliefs on abortion, on gender identity, gay marriage, was there any watch outs in terms of how we should prepare ourselves to be attacked by the world?
Well, I mean, I think there was plenty of that kind of concern that was out there. I'm trying to think. Our convention, so this doesn't speak for all of them that are out there, but our convention had more concerned about how to minister and wanting input from the CTCR and from the seminaries on how to do this. Now, I always kind of spin, I kind of spin my head on these types of things sometimes because it's like they do this, or they're sending a resolution, and there was one resolution that was like 6 pages long, so they were really just sending a resolution that they wanted affirmed by the seminaries and and whoever else was present on their point of view. You know what I mean? Sometimes those types of things. So when the floor committees get them, they change them to make sure that they're more in line with what the Synod does, that is, encourages or suggests or something like this, because we don't ever command, anything. Nothing comes down, or nothing's supposed to come down from a, hardline position. St. Stephen will, have their acolytes wearing fancy colored robes. I mean, you're not going to get that type of command that comes down. They can suggest it, that all acolytes wear, fancy colored, liturgically correct robes or something. I mean, they could do that, but it's not like it's hard-lined, this is what you kind of do. Now, I will comment on a couple things, though. One of the things that I think is important for us to kind of understand and see is that there was one resolution that wants our church body to come up with a position on, like, for example, with some of the vaccinations and their connection to fetal tissue. So there was issues that came up surrounding those types of things. Now, of course, this created a little bit of angst within the whole thing there, because you have all kinds of medications that are out there that people are taking, that you have those fetal tissue types of things that were introduced, and how this was introduced, and all this kind of thing. So again, these are some really delicate, very delicate topics that are out there in that regard, but they're important for us to be mindful of and to be paying attention, to. Does that help? I mean, there was nothing specific to those types of things. There was one on, what was it? What was that talking about though? It was, so there were a couple ones that were trying to kind of get, but it was more so help on how to minister, I think, to gender identity kind of issues and those types of things. But I think that was, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, because like I know like some people were kind of like bringing in, this. And so here's the challenge. The committee that put together the resolutions to bring it there on, they met back in February. So they're preparing these resolutions back then. But if you start thinking about like whether it's gender issues or racial issues or well, just to gender and sexuality issues that are out there, right? This stuff is changing so fast in our culture that some of the language you used even 6 months ago is no longer really the language you use. It's something that's evolved into something new. And so I think that there was a little bit of hang up in that regard, that they were wanting to change resolutions here, there, and everywhere on it. But it was more of a matter of just simply saying and referring it to Synod to say, hey, can you look at these topics? Can you look at a document that you put out that maybe doesn't say things quite the way maybe you should say something, like a CTCR document that's out there? And those types of things happen all the time. You know what I mean? Those types of things happen all the time. Problem with the CTCR document, I remember one time Reed Lessing was saying that he was responding to the Left Behind series. And so he was commenting that he hoped it made it through doctrinal review before Jesus came back. So, I mean, these things take time, and the more you put it up there, the less it probably can say anyway. So I mean, these are good topics for individual things to study, circuits to study, congregations to study. When you get this information that's out there, I mean, I think that's more helpful, because otherwise you're just going to get, it's like, okay, how many of us at the board of directors or elders went through the last synodical summary of the resolutions to see if there was anything that we needed to be adopting here at our place? Well, zero, right? That didn't happen. So we got enough things going on here that we don't have to worry about somebody else bringing something else into what we're doing here. Not that all these things aren't important. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm just simply saying is that, I mean, how many of you have read a CTCR document? Raise your hand if you've read a CTCR document. Okay, so 5 or 6 of you have done that, yeah. I mean, I'm just saying, my wife's laughing because she's like, yeah, do you want to read any CTCR? No, she's not really wanting to read a CTCR document. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Church theology, CT, church theology, and theological review, yeah. See, I didn't even know what that is. It's just an acronym that doesn't mean anything, yeah.
It's
okay.
not light reading.
Church relations and...
The synod gets a committee together to study a specific thing, like women's ordination or closed communion or the lodges or stuff like that, and they focus entirely on that. And it's usually about a 30-page document, roughly, and they're pretty thorough in terms of the biblical content, and they try to address the things that are happening at the time. And I know sometimes the synod will redo them. It's Commission on Theological and Church Relations.
Thank you.
On theology and church relations. but they're good. They're really good.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, for the most part, like I said, it'll come out, and then there'll always be some people that don't agree with everything that's in them. And so sometimes that's where resolutions go back at that because they didn't like the language. But again, I mean, one of those documents that came out 4 years ago on gender or on, something along the lines of sexuality, I mean, how outdated is that now, right? I mean, this stuff is so fluid, it's changing, by the, so obviously some stuff's going to, have to change, and I remember like sometimes there would be people that would take issue with things that are in those. And I remember being at the seminary, I took a bioethics class with Dr. Weiss, Dr. Bob Weiss, who was a doctor, and he was also, a doctor of theology. So when he was talking about his bioethics things, I mean, he was talking about stuff that's going on right now that he already foresaw was going to be going on. Really in the medical field, what they are doing with the fetus stuff that they have collected and the replication of that. Now, again, you can't clone, but they're not saying it's cloning, but they're cloning stem cells, for stem cells or whatever cells you're trying to get onto these things. So the original host is the one that was aborted, but they want to remove all the subsequential things from that by simply saying it's still just part of this one mistake and now the rest of them are there. Now, there are some that believe that every time you have, the 23 chromosomes? What is it? Yeah, that anytime you combine 23 chromosomes, that is another life. Now, it's kind of how God defines it, but, if people want to try to sort those types of things out in their own mind of doing it, I mean, you can see why this kind of stuff is a very concerning type of thing. Maybe you remember even in the vaccination issue with COVID, that this stuff came up, that this was being used. And there were concerns about that. I think there were statements that kind of tried to come out to say that, well, this particular vaccine was not using that. Again, I did not follow it close enough. Based on the reaction of those at the convention, this is not a clear issue. And that's why they're referring it further up to say, hey, can we clarify what we're talking about here or not? Does that make sense? Yeah. I mean, I remember Dr. Weiss, he was the one that was talking, he said, Roe versus Wade will never be overturned. It'll never be overturned unless unless somehow you pass a law that basically said life begins at conception. If you had that, then of course you'd have a different rule, because Roe versus Wade is just a property rights issue. That's all it is. It's a property rights issue. And so the challenge that's going to the Supreme Court right now is that the Supreme Court may say that states are the one that gets to decide what decisions are made regarding abortion. So if they return that, then we will have states that will have abortions and we'll have states that won't have abortions. I mean, that's what's happening with that, because they're going to just refer that back to the states to sort out whose property this is, or to deal with this issue however they seem fit to deal with this issue. But those that are going to hang on to, being abortion states are simply going to make the same argument that this, whatever you want to call it, to not make it sound like a baby, is the mother's property, and she can do with it whatever she wants. That's what they're making. And that's why you're hearing of things that are even extending that beyond birthday, because it's her property. You do whatever she wants with her property. It's a property rights issue. And I mean, in this regard, it's kind of really interesting, because it's like, guess whose property a frozen embryo is? It's the father's. Why? Well, because he can't produce an egg. So it's not his or hers. She's got eggs still. He doesn't. That's how they did. This is how they sort out the property things. I mean, so yeah, I mean, it's messy, it's complicated. What's God's design? Well, husband and wife that he blesses with a child. That's God's design. Now, I know I'm opening a gigantic can of worms with this, but there are certain steps that you can do to help that process, which are completely biblical. But there are also a lot of steps that are out there that are really, really shady in doing this, right? I mean, Bob Weiss is saying we've got them floating around here, because I've done that Bible study before, but it's all about playing God. It's all about playing God. This is what's going on. So, yeah. All right. Does that answer that, Barry? Kind of, yeah. Do you have anything to add on that?
Well, yeah, the floor committee 3, which was theology, church, and culture, and Deaconess was part of that committee, had 3 resolutions brought forward. One was to encourage Senate to clarify our stance on fetal tissues and their use related to pharmaceutical products. Resolution 302 was to encourage the Senate to develop resources to aid congregations and schools regarding gender identity issues. And their third one was to affirm biblical anthropology and denounce racism and an anti-gospel belief. So that's 3 resolutions that were brought forward to identify cultural issues.
Yeah. Thanks, Brian. That probably is a little more pointed to what you were asking.
Once again, I don't mean to be overly negative, but I was asking from the standpoint of if our church gets attacked by the world. And so the example there is, if anybody's seen what's going on at Concordia, Wisconsin,
Yeah.
and not so much what our position is on these different topics, but how should we as a church pull together, stick together, stay together, and handle when the world comes after us. And we just went through COVID, and you talked about that earlier, but you know, there was a lot of things that happened during COVID where they wanted us to report who was showing up in church. And fortunately, that didn't happen here. But
it happened in Kansas City.
yeah.
Yeah. It
But-
happened in Kansas City. So not Liberty.
But those kinds of things, because as Lutherans, we are kind of different when
Right.
it comes to our view on these things that happen in our culture. And I just wondered if there was any watch outs.
Yeah, and President Harrison addressed that. And I think he did a pretty good job. I mean, this is the world we live in this, right? So we have I think it's Alliance, the Defense Alliance for Religious Freedoms. I think that's our legal representative firm that deals with these types of things. So I know that they contacted the city of Kansas City to say, you can't do this. And if you do this, you're going to get sued on this. Yeah. I mean, I think they're the ones that got them to kind of soften that. And I think eventually on all of the COVID stuff, especially in the Midwest, you really saw a big laxing of them, even including churches, period, because they were getting away from and understanding that this was indeed perhaps violating that, that which we have right to. But,
If anybody's interested in hearing discussions and inform people talk about this stuff, all those resolutions that Brian read about, all three of those topics are talked about all the time on a program called Issues, Etc. And I listen to almost every episode that they ever do. And they're constantly going over these things from a fresh perspective. Then they bring in specialists.
Yeah.
And
and they've got their stuff recorded too, right? I mean,
Yeah,
you could go back and listen to topical types of things
You
right
can-
on their website.
It's a podcast now. It used to be
Yeah.
a radio. Well, it still is a radio program too, but it is. Well, it used to be an official LCMS, but they were fired because of money, But they're basically, it's an LCMS organization.
I was kind of connected at KFUO at one time
Yeah,
or something
yeah.
like that. So yeah.
But it's called Issues, Etc.
Yeah, and we also have a guy. I think I shared his link before, but we have a lobbyist in Washington that's being funded, that's connected to our church body too, and he's also, God, what's his name? Is anybody else? Seltz, yeah. What's his first name? Gregory Seltz. Yep, he's the one that gave me an A- on my sermon, and then Dr. Meyer changed it to a B-. So I like him better. Yeah, good.
Well, President Harrison I thought it was kind of interesting, made a contact that we had some really good lawyers.
Yeah, he did say we have some really good lawyers, And the sad thing about that, though, is that we will eventually run out of money to defend ourselves. We will run out of money. Hopefully, if it gets to something like we just saw tried in Finland, where they wanted to put one of their bishops in jail for holding a biblical view of marriage, that turned out that he escaped that aspect, but no, it was a he. Yeah, it was a bishop there. Well, there was two people, okay, but they're still going after them. They're not done. They're still continuing to go after them in that regard.
Well, they kicked him out of the churches. The churches were government owned, so.
Right. Well, that's true too. The churches are government owned there. That's why. Yeah. And I saw one of my best friends from high school point that out there. Again, separation of church and state, and it's just like, dude, that's not what that means. It means the state will not interfere. The state cannot mandate what the church believes, teaches, and confesses. That's the separation of church and state. But in this country, we are in the freedom of ideas category. So our ideas and voice are just as valid as anybody else's, because nobody comes out of a vacuum. Everybody has a worldview that has been shaped by their upbringing and their experiences. Nobody comes out of a vacuum. So just because you come out of a conservative church body, that does not mean your voice does not matter, because you can't mix church and state. I get so sick and tired of hearing that aspect. That is not what this is about. That's not what the Constitution's saying. It's very much in, and again, just so you know, because I know a lot of people that post things like, put prayer back in school. That is not an LCMS position, that especially old LCMS position. That's a very Baptist-y position, to put the Ten Commandments, put prayer back in school. But an old Lutheran understanding of that is, I do not want the Baptist teacher putting their doctrine into my Lutheran kids in the public school either. All of that stuff needs to stay out of the school education system, period. Right? I mean, that's my opinion.
It's the similar as saying under God in the Pledge of Allegiance too.
Yeah.
It's the same concept,
Yeah.
because all Americans will say that, but who's God?
Yeah, whose God are they talking to?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that used to be why, back in 1938, our confession was, we do not pray with other Christians. That was our position in the LCMS, because we didn't believe the same thing, so you might not be praying to the same God in that regard. Now, again, I'm really going over the edge, but see, these are the things that Pastor Joe is more considered about. This is my conservativeness coming through in this regard. So, sorry.
I think it's really good because it's what the world's dealing with.
Yeah, it is. It is what the world's dealing with, and you hear it all the time. I mean, it's kind of like, folks, if you believe what a Muslim believes, or if you believe what a Jew believes, or if you believe what a Mormon believes, that is not the way and the truth and the life. And there's only one way to the Father, and that's through the Son. I'm sorry, but we've gotten a little soft on that idea that, well, as long as you believe in God, that's the therapeutic, what is it? I always forget it, especially when I get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, right? It's moralistic therapeutic deism. That's what that is. It's just lets everybody feel good about themselves, and back to the book of Judges, that everybody does what they think's right in their own eyes. And that's where we're at. And this is scary stuff. Because you know what happens, you know what God does when that becomes the mantra of society. It doesn't end well. Right. But I don't think it's different. I really don't think it's different. I'm sorry. I guess the older I get, the more grumpy I get with these sort of things. But it's just like, why would we think that weather is not something that is controlled by God to get our attention? Why would we think that world events are not something that God is using to get our attention? He did it in the past. How did Joseph get to be the second most powerful man in the world? Because he got lucky? No. We're told right in Scripture why. So that God could save his people in the famine. So that Joseph could bring his family of his precious chosen people to Goshen. Are we in trouble? Nope, we're not in trouble. Because God is working all things for his good purposes, and we are his people, and he is working things for our good. He's working things for our good. So no matter what happens in the next election, no matter what happens in the school system, it doesn't matter. Because God is working this for our good. Always working for our good. End of story. It's not debatable.
And so with that being said, I think you will agree with this. You're not saying don't be involved.
Right.
You know,
Absolutely.
we need
Yeah.
to be involved, you know, but
Yeah. Yeah, and you know what? You guys can be more involved than I can be. Honestly, you can be much more involved. That's just the way it is. I mean, you can be much more involved than what I can be. Like for example, I really cannot gather with other pastors, you know, like, so if there was a horrific event, like something that happened at Uvalde, I mean, I cannot be a part of a community-led church service that takes place there. But you guys can. You guys can. I mean, you got to be careful. I mean, I got to be careful. I mean, I could lose my job, though. That's probably more so what the deal is. But you wouldn't fire me. That's true. We could be New Haven too. All right. Good. Oops. Speak into that. Speak into the mic there. Yeah. There you go.
He said to the disciples, "Something you got to be as clever and smart as snakes, because the world works that way. You don't be that way as far as your solutions, but it's like due diligence. Keep your ears open.
Yeah.
What's happening around you, because the attacks will come in. No matter, we know the attacks will come. So that sort of, I can't remember the full quote, but you know, he was just saying, like,
Yeah.
And if
Wise as serpents. Yeah. And there's also the shrewd steward, right? I mean, the shrewd steward. I mean, there's no reason why we can't be shrewd in this world about what's going on. You know, I mean, like there was, I think one of the government was offering to resurface playgrounds or something along the lines of that, but they didn't make that money available to a Christian schools playground, and that went all the way to Supreme Court, and it won. You can't do it for one and not do it for the other. I mean, you know, be shrewd. I mean, if we can gainfully get something from, you know, somebody else that's going to support our ministry, but by all means, let's do it. I mean, I know, like, sometimes Thrivent concerns people, right, about their new direction or where they're going. But you know what, guys? They're still giving each of you guys $500 that you can use towards ministry here, and you can direct your Thrivent match dollars to do it. No one else is doing that. Prudential's not doing that. Last I checked, nobody else sends a check for us, do they? Besides Thrivent? Yeah. I mean, be shrewd as whatever you need to be shrewd as. That's just part of the whole process, right?
I'm always taken by the methodology of the pro-abortion group. You would probably find a majority of those people being so hypocritical and that they would never want to harm a baby eagle or a baby seal, but yet the propaganda that comes out of them is that this is not a baby, and it's not referred to as a baby. And a lot of the women who have abortions have no idea that it is. And after about 8-10 days, you can see that a forming fetus looks like a baby. And after about 2 or 3 weeks, there's no question that that's the case. And I've always said that I think it would the way to get people to know that if they were ever to show ultrasounds of how an abortion is done and how a baby is cut up and mangled and sucked out into a vacuum tube, that I'm not sure that there'd be a lot of women who would want to go ahead and do that once they found out the truth about that. But that's never done. And you see all the people on TV that are that are chanting, pro-abortion, most of those people have no blanket idea about what's involved when that happens. I'm convinced that that's the case.
Yeah, no, I agree, and that's why I like the Liberty Women's Clinic, because they walk with both. I mean, they walk with both of them. Those that are struggling with the decision, and those that have made that decision and are feeling like they need somebody to talk to. That's why I love the Liberty Women's Clinic, because that group gets it. They really do get it. I mean, this is just a one-on-one battle, and really the life issue is winning in our country. I mean, the abortion clinics have been closing on a pretty regular basis across our country throughout the year. We were already winning the war on life just by that particular way that you're talking about, one-on-one, and educating and having people know this type of stuff that's there.
I used to go over and talk to third, fourth grade kids, their health class, about a variety of things, and I would have a list of slides about a developing fetus.
Nice.
And would pop those up on the screen and would ask them, what is this about a 10-day, 14-day fetus? Is this a chicken? Is this a pig? Well, they all knew it was a baby.
They all knew it was a baby.
There was no question about it to those little kids. They knew.
Yeah, and that's what I said. I think society is grabbing onto that aspect of it. I mean, they just are. I mean, it's an evil thing. I mean, it's an evil thing in the sense that it does, and you're going to tug at a heartstring on the rear crazy things, but it's like, okay, I mean, that's like less than 1%. I mean, it's not even, it's a fraction of a percent. I mean, when you're using it for birth control, that's just, and that's the big thing right now is the abortion pill. I mean, it's just, how many, we have no idea. I mean, it's crazy. Yeah, crazy. Yeah, what was that? Something came to my mind when you were talking about that too. Just the justifying language that they use at this point is that human life then has become defined by whether or not that person is wanted, or that's what defines relationship, which is scary for all different aspects of life. Because what is that? That was it Iceland that was bragging that they had gotten rid of all the Down syndrome babies, that they don't have them anymore or something like that. Wasn't that Iceland or something like that? Yeah, or some other, kind of crazy thing, and you're just like, wow, that's a victory? That's a victory? Because somebody's got Down syndrome? That's an unwanted person? That's an unwanted life? I mean, that's not what God says, right? Yeah, Barry.
What's really scary about that, if that's true, and Iceland did that, was how many of those supposed Down syndrome babies weren't Down syndrome babies.
Right.
And a classic example of that is my daughter, Hallie. So Debbie was 42 when she got pregnant, so she was considered high risk. And we had to go through genetic counseling. So we had to go downtown to the big hospital. This was in Charlotte, North Carolina. We had to go downtown to the big hospital. It was unbelievable, the ultrasound. And this was 20 years ago, because Hallie was almost 21. The ultrasound measured everything on that fetus. Measured the thickness of the skin on the back of the neck, measured all the ventricles in her heart, measured the length of her femur, and there's all sorts of ratios that things need to match up to in order to tell whether it's a healthy baby or not. And everything was perfect except for one thing. She had what they called brightness of the bowels, which means in her intestines there was white spots. And they didn't tell us that right away. The technician had Debbie get dressed, and they took us in this room, and 4 people showed up. It was the doctor, it was the technician, it was some kind of counselor, and somebody else. And they got all serious on us, and they said brightness of the bowels could just be blood drops that she had ingested, or it's a high likelihood that she's a Down syndrome baby.
Wow.
They made us sign a release form that said we were not going to have an abortion. This was 20 some years ago. And I've often told this story, and I've often thought, imagine a young person. I mean, fortunately, Debbie was 42, I was 38, 37, whatever. So we had kind of some maturity to us, hopefully.
Right, well-grounded, yeah.
And we didn't consider it for a minute, but somebody else could have just said, okay, let's abort the baby.
Yeah.
And now look at her today.
Yeah, no, exactly. But yeah, no, that's, that, like I said, that's good. And like I said, it's just, I mean, I left there encouraged. Did you leave from the district convention pretty encouraged? Yeah, I mean, I felt for the most part pretty encouraged. Like I said, I just thought there was a fraternity of brothers that was just really cool to see, as far as, how I thought united a lot of the clergy were in their way of interacting and getting together. And of course, it was just interesting, just really interesting to see this flavor of it. And I think a lot of people are just glad to be back together, and without having masks on and all that kind of stuff. And just, I think, like I said, most of us have gotten to the place where you understand where your congregation is now at after COVID, because we've gone through that too at St. Stephen. I mean, we've been through COVID. There were bumps and bruises, of course, as you go through all of these types of things. And at the end of the day, it's getting back to what is it that God calls us to be? What does God want us to be doing in this place? And so, I mean, I encourage you guys. The Ministry Clarity, you're going to probably get hit with is it an email? Maybe Matt can guide us a little bit on that. Maybe an email comes out on Saturday that's going to have links to the survey.
Yeah, so the survey opens on Saturday, which is when Team Jesus News comes out. So we'll definitely have the QR code and link there. We're going to have printed copies of the survey here as well, and a kind of a box to put those in. And then we'll have multiple announcements over the next month about filling out the survey and reminders and things like that.
Right. Yeah. So these are simple questions that you're going to be asked about. I mean, we're really wanting to get the pulse of the congregation on where you feel like we're at. What do we want to do in the next 5 years or something along the lines of that. But it's just more of it'll be a positive experience. I hope it's a positive experience for us. It just, the last time we did something like this probably was where we worked with somebody on it, would have been back in 2013 when we did the Seasons of Discovery, and that was led by Transforming Churches Network that did that. This time it's going to be led by Lutheran Church Extension Fund. I'll stop using acronyms when I actually know what the acronyms mean. So a familiar face, I think, Pastor Frith, who's with Lutheran Church Extension Fund, but he used to be a pastor at Beautiful Savior Lutheran Church in Olathe. And if you guys remember, he came over and helped us do Consecrated Stewards. And like he did 1 and 2 with us, and then we ran out of material for them. So then, we did, Matt helped write at least 1, and maybe Lauren Meyer helped write 1, 2, or something like that. So we did like 3, 4, and 5. We, gave them a bunch of data too, stuff, along the lines of that. So it's just real helpful. But it'll be good. I mean, it's good to be refreshing. And I think that that's what most experts are simply saying, is that the church is in a different place, and the pandemic has escalated the fall of the organized church even faster. So this is the direction that we're going. And like I said, I think maybe you guys have heard me use that analogy. I mean, I like the way that one guy put the analogy is that, I mean, the bridge is out. The normal way of doing church business, the bridge is out. And so we can either sit there and wait for the bridge to get fixed, which ain't gonna happen, right? Or we got to find a different path. And there's nothing wrong with that, because is Christ going to let his church go away? No, it's not. We just need to be faithful to what he tells us to do. We need to be faithful to what he tells us to do, be obedient to what he tells us to do, and the gates of hell will not stand up against his church. Yeah. We want to be here, if we want to be here another 60 years, I mean, if we want to be here for 150th anniversary, well, we won't be here for the 150th anniversary. Maybe we got some young ones here, huh? Fisher will be here. Yeah. Donovan, you're like on the border, right? So, yeah. I mean, if we're going to be here, it's just about being faithful, because our Lord is faithful to us, and he always will be faithful to us. Amen. Stay the course. All right. And the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, our Heavenly Father, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with and abide with you always. Amen. Can I wave?